In my college days, now 20 years ago, me and some friends often took off for the North Georgia mountains on the weekend. When we wanted to smoke and drink and commune with nature, these mountains were perfect. On the weekend this unsettling event occurred. Me, my friend Bill, and his German Shepherd Monty headed out towards Sky Valley. It was the beginning of fall semester at UGA, and not much was going on yet. We had found an area where a dirt road led back a half mile, and then we would hike in another mile or so and set up camp near a creek. Excellent trails were nearby with fun places to explore, not to mention flat ground perfect for setting up camp. Bill and I arrived at our spot around 4 p.m. and got a fire going. We were musicians, Bill a guitar player and me a percussionist, so we sparked up and we started jamming. Around 10, after jamming a while, we chatted about life and girls before tucking in for the night. It was a clear night and we just slept under the stars. It is important to note, too, that we never had any sign of other people in this area during our other trips. At about 2 a.m. in the morning, I was awoken by Monty growling. It was a deep guttural growl. Bill was still dead to the world, and I sat up to look around and listen, thinking maybe an animal had come near our campsite. The fire was only embers at this point, so it was hard to see. But I just barely heard audible voices in the distance. Focusing on the area of the voices, I saw a faint red glow, followed by another faint red glow to the left of the first. This was about 100 yards away. My mind connected what I was seeing, cigarette embers burning, and they were getting closer. "Bill," I whispered. "Wake up!" Bill roused from his sleep, and I explained what was going on. At this point, Monty started barking as the strangers approached the camp. By the time we stood up, they were in the camp, completely unfazed by the now rabid 70-pound German Shepherd. Two incredibly unkept, late 30s and early 40s deliverance-looking mofos walked up on us. Bill told Monty to calm down, and I will never forget the look of these guys. Skinny as hell, about 5'8", shirts caked in grime, mangy beards, and probably 5 teeth between the two men. Each had huge knives attached to their belt buckles. "What are you boys doing way out here? Look like you're having a good time." We responded and told them that we'd been out there to camp and drink some beer. They asked if we had any weed, and we gave them some. They looked around a bit and asked if we wanted to smoke with them. We declined, saying that we were headed out early. Throughout the conversation, anything Bill or I said, they looked at each other before responding. Finally, before they left, one of them said, "You'll stay safe out here. You never know who you could run into, you know?" Followed by a laugh as they walked away. We packed up earlier than we expected, and we left. The thing that sketches me out to this day, though, is the fact that we only woke up because the dog was with us. So, I've definitely seen some things. Possible graves like 50 plus miles away from the nearest access road, shelter structures that don't line up with human survival techniques, maybe a Bigfoot, though I think it was in all likelihood just a large curious bear, and some shredded animals deep in the woods without their organs or muscles being eaten, as if someone or something just did it for fun. As I've been saying a lot lately, what has spooked me the most and turned me into a believer, though, is what I've heard. The creepiest experience I have is about a deep night in the Oregon woods. I'll preface this by giving my background too, not as a brag or anything, but just to show that my outdoor and survival bona fides are there. I'm 37. I've literally spent over 5 total years alone in the woods, camping and hiking. I've gone months without ever even talking to another human being. I've taken every class or training that you can imagine in identifying animals, especially threatening ones that can kill me. I've walked most of the Appalachian Trail barefoot. I've spent weeks in varying wilderness areas across the US and Canada. I know what a mountain lion sounds like, whether it's mating, scared, or communicating, or whatever. I know what foxes, bobcats, owls, and varying birds, moose, elk, deer, varying weasels, bison, bugs, sheep, bear, and everything in between sounds like. When you have a hobby like I do and spend every free second alone in the woods, you have to know sound. mountains. It's absolutely imperative, in fact, to know if something is close by that wants to eat you. And again, I only say all of this because it's inevitable that every time I tell one of my stories, at least one person is going to say, "Nah, dude, it's just a fox. They scream like bloody murder." Yes, I know that. So with that said, I've had 3 or 4 sounds that scared me that really don't match any animal living in North America. There was only one, though, that made me leave my camp early and go back to civilization. This time, I was actually doing a buddy camp with my oldest friend. He's the same age and has more experience in the woods than even I do. We met up in Oregon for a 2-week camp in the vicinity of Mount Hood National Park. We were well off the beaten path, no people or civilization anywhere near us. And one late night, at our camp setup, he and I were sitting by a fire, just bullcrapping around and reminiscing. It's also important to note that we were definitely sober. I do occasionally drink, and I do occasionally smoke too, but never on these trips. Your sobriety and level head can be the difference between life and death out there, so it's just something that I don't do. And as we were talking, from maybe 300 yards or so away, down in a ravine, we heard a growl or a howl or a scream of some sort that persisted for like several minutes. And I mean, it literally vibrated our heads. That's how powerful it was. It was guttural and just booming, and the only way I've ever been able to describe it is imagine a huge horror movie with limitless budget. Imagine some huge, powerful demon. And now, imagine in that movie that the demon is somehow defeated and sent back to hell. Imagine the demon's scream of agony and anger as it's dragged back to where it came from. It was like that, and it was terrible. And I mean, 2 grown men with decades of experience, both of us carrying firearms for protection, firearms that, if need be, could take down a 1,000-pound bear, in hysteric tears, clinging to each other, frantically deciding what to do. We made it until the first signs of day and just booked our asses back to our checkpoint and got the hell out of, not just the area, but Oregon completely. I'm just now getting to the point where I can actually talk about it again. I never went out there to monster hunt. It's always just been about my love of nature and animals and solitude. Over the last few months, I've become enthralled with unknown sounds because of my own experiences, though. I have never gone out with any technology except a mobile GPS and an emergency satellite phone. My next trip is coming in May, and I've recently invested in solid recording equipment, an FLIR camera and a solid digital video recorder too. And this next trip, I'm going to actively devote time to recording the things that I've heard. So I live in a very small town, and the house across the street from where I live was constantly changing its occupants. In about 2 years, there must have been 3 families who had moved in and out. Normally my family kept to their own and doesn't really get to know our neighbours. I mean, we had conversations every once in a while, but other than that, no contact. But the family that stood out the most was the 3rd family that lived there. The only reason we happened to talk to Gerald was because, well, he'd gotten a new mailbox and had kindly replaced ours with the house's original mailbox. Ours was really badly damaged. We assumed he did it because it looked bad and the mailbox was on their lawn. But one day, when me and my dad were playing outside together, Gerald was doing some yard work. So my dad, wanting to thank him, walked over. But when he got closer, I had realized that he had a puppy with him. I, being 15 at the time, immediately started petting it while my dad and Gerald had started talking. But when they were done, my dad came over to me and told me that we had to leave. So we went back home, and later that night, I overheard my father tell my mother that Gerald just seemed kind of off. Skip ahead a few months too, and I'm a very light sleeper, which means that when I heard screaming from across the street, I immediately woke up. I was very much still half asleep when I looked at the time, about 2 a.m, and stumbled towards the window. I looked out, and I see nothing, so I just go back to sleep. About an hour later, I wake up to sirens though, so I get up again to look out the window, and I see an ambulance coming and a few police officers coming too. I'm quite nosy, so I stay up to watch what happens, and I see Gerald get arrested, and I see his wife being put into the ambulance. After this, several black SUVs show up and take up the whole street. And eventually, I just go back to sleep knowing that I had school the next day. The next morning, I get up and I go to school. When I'm outside waiting for the bus, I realize that everything just looks extremely normal. Too normal, in fact. I go throughout the school day, not worrying too much about it, thinking that it's just my overactive imagination giving me weird dreams or something. And after school, my mother told me that she actually saw Gerald on the news. He was arrested after calling the police on himself for bashing his wife's head in with a sledgehammer. I was obviously surprised. I mean, not only was my dream not a dream, but I had woken up to the sounds of her screams for help. I've never really told anyone that part too. The wife never came back to the house. People came and took all the belongings. I hope she survived, but I'm not too sure. It took a while for anyone to stay in that house again, in fact. And eventually, people came and are now living there. Like I said, I don't know what the outcome of all this was, but hearing those screams, it still haunts me. For a bit of context, I was 16 and pretty naive at the time. Working in a supermarket and going through sixth form, I had to take a bus journey from where I lived to my place of work. Also, the buses were, and still are, absolutely awful for being on time or arriving at all, in fact. So, I was waiting at the bus stop during a horrible downpour of rain with my coat and umbrella, but was still getting completely soaked. When all of a sudden, the door to a house really close to the stop opened, and two guys came out and told me to come and stand on their open porch. It didn't have walls, just a couple of columns holding it up. And I thought, well, why not? They're being nice, and it would stop my uniform from being more drenched than what it was. They seemed like really nice guys too, and I started off talking about how the bus is always late around that time, and they agreed. We then talked about how they ran a business or something to do with some decorating, I think, and they started asking me about my work. I told them funny stories about people being idiots working there or customers, and they asked if things went missing or were stolen, if they were noticed at all, and I said that I knew people who took tools and things, but no stock. But the way it's kept was pretty idiotic. Basically, the loading bay was always full of pallets of stock from food to electronics or whatever. Looking back on it, I was a complete idiot, but I thought it was just nice conversation. So my bus was getting to 20 minutes late by this point, but hey, I was drying off now, so it was cool. The guy started saying things that I don't really remember, but along the lines of, we can take you to work, you can open up the back gate so we can take some things and no one will notice, and you could come stay with us. It's a really big house. And at this point, I was just thinking about how much of a hole that I dug myself in. They know my transport wasn't there, and they know where I worked and pretty much everything. And I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to be able to outrun both of them either. I just gave excuses in the end of, I don't have the back door keys, and I can't live here, and I have a home with my stuff in it, but they weren't taking no for an answer. Also, I vaguely remember the two of them working their way around me, forcing me to start backing off into the rain. One of them tried to grab me as well, but I managed to pull away and start backing up. In the luckiest stroke in my life, the bus turned up right at that moment too, and stopped. I ran into the bus and screamed something like, "Thank God you're here," and got the bus driver to take off. I've never been more terrified in my life, and thankfully I didn't have anything happen after that. I never reported it though, and hell, I never even told my parents. I probably should have, I know, but safe to say I never used that bus stop ever again. This weekend, I went hiking with my boyfriend and a few of his friends. The five of us were heading up to a not-so-popular mountain trail that is about 10 miles long up to a small lake. We saw two couples on their way down, but no one passed us on the way up. The trail isn't super easy, and wildlife is pretty common. We even saw a moose about 3 miles in, so we were all on guard for more moose or mountain lion or anything that could cause a problem. After the moose, we ran into a small patch of snow that was maybe 100 feet along the trail. Past the snow, we walk another 20 to 30 yards and find a deer's ribcage and spine. We gathered around it, not saying much, and one of the guys turns it over with a stick. And it's picked totally clean. After we stand up, an older guy is standing like 10 feet away, just staring at the group of us. The weird thing, though, is that not one of us heard or saw him walk up. It was kind of like he just appeared there, and after we make eye contact with him, he just turns to his right, jumps over the little creek, cutting through 12 to 18 inches of snow, and walks up the side of the mountain, disappearing into the tree line, making plenty of noise. We never did see that guy again after that, but how he got there without us noticing or hearing anything, that's beyond me. I spent the majority of 2011 and 2012 living at an old farmhouse in New Hampshire. The house itself was in need of some minor repairs, but outside of that, it looked like a typical New Hampshire farmhouse. This is a description of the farmhouse from Zillow. It reads, listed in the New Hampshire State Register of Historic Places, the Burley homestead has been in continuous family ownership for over 200 years and retains the essential characteristics of the dwelling, as it was built around 1760. Portions of the home were remodeled during the early 1800s. Set back nicely on the lot, the side entry porch invites you through the gardens to the door. The centre chimney reflects various fireplace openings in most rooms, and a huge cooking fireplace with oven in the country kitchen. The sitting room fireplace is surrounded by early panelling, and mantel shelf reflects a federal-style period. The front foyer with wide pine flooring, huge entry door, a captain's staircase to the second floor, 3 bedrooms, an updated bath, and a back room area with walk upstairs to the attic. 2 wonderful barns for the hobbyist to enjoy, home business as well, many original features, carriage shed and more. A unique opportunity to own this special home. At first, it was an incredible experience too. The 5 of us, 2 sisters, my mother, father and I, were all ecstatic about the size of this house. We'd been living place to place for the majority of my childhood, and the majority of them were small, so to see all the space we had was just a dream come true. When you walk inside from the porch, you're greeted with a kitchen in the far back, and this white door next to the sink. The white door led to an expansion of the house, this small, carpeted room with the washer and the dryer inside. Oddly enough, as I was refreshing my visuals of the house, I noticed that Zillow and many other sites doesn't show the inside of this added-on laundry, nor what's behind the house. I always had a weird feeling about that room as soon as I entered it for the first time, so I just typically stayed away from it. I lived upstairs with a window looking out towards the front of the house. About a week into living there, things seemed, well, pretty normal. My sisters and I were attending school, my father was truck driving on the road, and my mother was a stay-at-home mum. But one day, while I was grabbing something to drink, my mum asked me about this weird rock formation outside the window that's inside the laundry room. I hadn't noticed it at the time, so I walked inside the room and peered out the window. About 10 to 15 feet away was this odd stack of rocks, and it seemed like they were pointing in a specific direction, oddly enough, aligned with the window in front of you as you enter into the laundry room. I had an eerie feeling in my gut. At this point, I've seen my fair share of superstition in life and wasn't interested in ruling anything out. I searched around the room for anything else that seemed odd or eerie. The carpet I was standing on wasn't properly stapled to the floor, as if it was covering something. And under the carpet was a hardwood floor with a massive painted circle that took up the majority of the laundry room floor. It was a red and blue yin-yang, with several weird constellation-looking symbols inside. Some, later found, turned out to be symbols of planets, all lined up with this stack of rocks in this backyard, and I recall there being other rock stacks, but nothing as weird as this. As soon as I saw this symbol, it was as if a coat of just negativity enveloped the house too. My mum was panicking, my dad wasn't home, sisters neither, just the 2 of us discovering this was a ritual or praying room inside this house to something. And that something I still don't know anything about to this day. In fact, that something could have been here since the 1800s. Over the course of the next few months, though, things started to move around the house and take a turn for the worst. Things would just magically disappear. My night terrors came back full swing. The energy in that place just felt evil. I can even recall my mum being possessed. My mother, sister, and I were sitting in the kitchen one early afternoon. My mum had just finished making a sandwich for herself, and we're all having a really pleasant and good conversation. My mum went inside the laundry room to switch the clothes from washer to dryer, but as soon as she opened the door, a dark overcast just overcame the sun. And immediately after this, I just felt this pressure in the room. My mother's smile turned to a frown as she exited the laundry room and suddenly became very angry with my sister. She was really angry. She had her hands up, literally instigating to fight my sister. There was this deep hatred of just rage in her eyes, and mind you, my sister isn't a bad person. This was just completely out of the blue. It lasted a few minutes before the overcast cleared up and my mother, standing there in the kitchen, came to her senses, asking what we were talking about. My sister and I, both appalled at what we just saw, tried explaining it to her, and she didn't remember an inch of it. We all had this constant feeling of being watched. My sisters used their TVs to sleep at night, similar to my mother. I just slept in the darkness. However, there was one night that honestly just changed me forever. It was a light overcast, about 2 a.m. at night, when I awoke out of my sleep. I felt like something was watching me and felt this urge to just get out of bed, sit next to it, and meditate. I don't meditate often, but I also don't wake out of my sleep in the middle of the night with a sudden urge to meditate, so I just obliged. As I was sitting down, eyes closed, meditating towards the window, I felt whatever had been watching me. When I opened my eyes, I saw this just weird-looking white masked thing with empty eyes about a foot away from my face. It also had swirly cheeks, similar to that of a Chinese demon mask, the same appearance, just white, and this black void in its eyes. It lasted for just half a second. I was completely speechless. When I went to get back in my bed, I heard a noise from my outside window as well. And gripped on the side is this greyish-brown looking gargoyle thing with wings, and what I believe was black eyes, although our eyes didn't seem to meet, but never noticed a glow. It just pushed itself off the side of my window and flew into the sky and was gone in a flash. I stayed up the majority of that night Googling to see if I could figure out what that was, but my results were, well, pretty much inconclusive. The white masked spirit in front of me resembled a Chinese demon mask when you search it. I don't recall seeing teeth. The majority of it was just peripherals, as I was encompassed and entranced by its hollow eyes. The winged creature honestly resembled a gargoyle. That's the only thing I can put it down to. But whatever it was, that house, although spacious, historical, and beautiful, was an absolute nightmare and hellish experience. I was not prepared for what I experienced there. It wasn't until a year or so later as well that I learned what pagans and Wiccans were, protection spells, and all that jazz. And with that knowledge, maybe it would have helped, or maybe it would have made it worse. Back in October of 1989, my mother and I went up to the western part of North Carolina for a week to see the leaves change colour. We rented a cabin, which was owned by the cousin of my brother's former high school band teacher, who had retired several years earlier. The band director was more or less just keeping watch over the place. He lived down the street, but it wasn't until Friday afternoon that we actually saw him. The cabin was somewhat in the wilderness, but it was near a main road. The band director had to go away for the weekend and was letting us know. We had the number of his cousin in case we needed any help. This was on a Friday afternoon, and up until that time, the trip had been pretty much uneventful. Friday evening came though, and we went to a church dinner, which was just down the road. When we came back home, it was already dark. My mum started thinking about how we were the only ones on this road, and we didn't really know where the nearest neighbour was, which was a little bit unsettling. The moon wasn't full that night, but there was some light to it. We had separate rooms in the cabin. The power went out in the cabin shortly after we came home from church dinner. And then my mother heard what sounded like footsteps, and she saw what looked like an outline of a hat. which meant that there was a man walking around near the cabin. Then we saw his hat disappear into the woods, and by this time, both of us are terrified that this man is going to come into the cabin and try and harm us. Both of us wondered if he had actually cut the power source. I decided to sleep in the bed, which was in my mother's room that night. We tried to sleep, and then were awakened by an owl howling. My mother could actually see the owl's eyes, which were looking into the window. The drape couldn't be closed the entire way, and the owl didn't take its eyes off of my mum the entire night. The owl also hooted all night. My mother tried to ignore the owl, but its presence just really unnerved her. The eyes really unnerved me as well. So in the end, neither of us could sleep, as every noise just jarred us awake. It would be like, "What's that?" or "What noise is that?" And every once in a while, we would also see the outline of that hat again walking around the general vicinity. Then it would go off into the woods, and both of us were freaked out at this point, but we weren't able to leave in the middle of the night. Plus, it would have been risky to go out there if there was actually someone out there. There was no phone in the cabin, and this was long before cell phones were in the common usage. The power finally did come back on several hours later, or so it seemed. We were in the wee hours of the morning at this point. Originally, we were going to leave on the Sunday, but we left as soon as the sun came up on the Saturday morning. Let me begin by giving you a bit of background information. I live in a large home and have 3 kids. My now ex-husband and I built the home over 10 years ago from the ground up. An old house used to be on the lot. We tore it down though and built a new one. When we moved in at the time, I only had one baby. I had decorated a bedroom as the nursery, and there he stayed until I became pregnant with my second baby, Max. We then moved into the bedroom down the hall, which we decorated to be a little less nursery-like and more boy-like. I had never had a good feeling about this end of the house and tried to make sure this room felt warm and cozy. Right outside the door of this room was a spot that just always made me feel uneasy. For over 10 years, this spot has made me feel creeped out for just no logical reason. The first while went without an issue for my then 3-year-old, which surprised me, to be honest, as I expected some adjustment period, but it was all good. But after about the first month, around 3 a.m., I heard him scream in absolute terror over the baby monitor. It jolted me awake, and I ran into his room. John was standing in his crib, pointing to the corner across the room. "Pirate, Mummy, pirate," he kept pointing. I looked in the dark corner, but I didn't see anything. He kept pointing, wide-eyed. I didn't hesitate. I whisked him up and carried him to my bedroom, and so began an almost nightly occurrence of John coming to my bed at around 3 a.m. Any time John slept in his new room, he would wake up just in terror, so I moved him back into the nursery with his baby brother, and this arrangement worked out fine, and John's room just sat empty at the end of the hall for years. Then came a weekend when my husband and I were actually going for a weekend getaway and leaving the boys with my dad and his partner Maria, an Indonesian woman who was quite religious. Her ethnicity doesn't really make a difference. I'm just trying to paint a picture here. Anyway, the first night after we were away, I called to check in. Maria got on the phone right away and whispered so my dad wouldn't hear her, and she was hard to understand through her panic and her accent. But from what I could ascertain, she was saying, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard talking down the hall outside John's old bedroom. It sounded like a man and a younger boy. I thought a TV was left on somewhere, so I got up to turn it off. I heard the talking coming from down the hall. I walked down the hall and they started talking faster, more urgent, until I got to John's room. They didn't stop talking though, they just started whispering. She was honestly absolutely terrified. I could tell that they were afraid to mention it to me because she didn't want to come across as crazy, but found it necessary to tell me. She whispered too because she couldn't explain this to my dad. He would not be pleased by such nonsense, so she'd been waiting for me to call. Now, up to this point, I hadn't told anyone about the hallway or John's room or anything, basically. Maria's experience, though, reinforced that I wasn't imagining that there was something slightly ominous going on there. But fast forward 9 years later, my husband and I had divorced, not because of anything paranormal, but because of his secretary. and I was now remarried to a great man myself. But things had moved pretty quickly. My husband moved in. I had never told him, or anyone else for that matter, of what I felt in the house. We got a pug and a rescue dog, and often the dogs would just sit in the foyer and stare intently into the dining room, and then furiously start barking in unison. The dining room was below John's room on the first floor, and was always an area that I got goosebumps too. It was a large, beautiful room with a chandelier, fireplace, and long table for 12 people. The dogs did this often, though, but it only happened when they were looking into the dining room. The dogs never went into the dining room, except for the occasional time that the pug took a crap under one of our dining chairs, but that's another story. So, I think it was an FU to whatever entity was in there. Otherwise, the dogs just sat straight up, side by side in the foyer, staring into the dining room for the longest while until they would both start just barking furiously at the same time. My new husband had a home office across the hall from the dining room. When I would come downstairs, every light was always turned on. I asked him why, and he said it was because he had this eerie feeling like he was being watched from the dining room, and it really unnerved him when the dog sat and just stared into the darkness, so he liked to keep the lights on. Eventually I got pregnant with my third child. John was now 10 and wanted his own room, so we had converted the guest room to be his bedroom because he refused to go into his old bedroom. Max stayed in the original nursery, and we were going to use the room at the end of the hallway for the baby. I told myself that I was silly, that it would be fine. It was such a beautiful room. But I just couldn't bring myself to have my newborn sleeping in there. We decorated it, especially for him, but in the end, I just said no. I couldn't bring myself to leave a newborn in this dark room. So he slept in our room in a bassinet and then a playpen for a full year. Surprisingly, too, my husband agreed. He said that he could feel it too, and was hesitant to actually leave him in that room. I was relieved that I didn't seem crazy, I must admit, but also felt more dread about my intuition being correct. Eventually, though, it was time for the baby to have his own room. So we bit the bullet and moved the baby in there. We also hired a nanny to help out during the day. She was a sweet little Filipino woman. And one day I came home one afternoon to find a little glass statue of Jesus on the baby's bookshelf and a rosary pinned to the bulletin board in his room. I thanked the nanny for the little gifts, but asked her what was behind them. She said, "It's for protection, ma'am. There's something very bad in that room." I was floored, to say the least, and filled with dread again. She felt it too, and it reinforced that I wasn't just imagining things. Surprisingly, though, all went pretty well, mostly with the baby sleeping. I had a very bright nightlight in the room and had the hall well lit as well, which seemed to help. But one night, a similar occurrence that happened almost 10 years ago with my firstborn seemed to play out again. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to my 2-year-old baby letting out a shriek of terror. I ran into his room, and there he stood in his crib, pointing to the same corner of the room that my other son had pointed to years ago. "Clown, mummy, clown," he kept pointing. So not a pirate this time, but his vocabulary is very limited, given that he's only 2, and I'm really not sure if he could articulate exactly what he saw. Also, he does not like clowns. But, who does, really? But again, I looked at the corner, and I saw nothing. I managed to settle him down, and he went back to sleep. But occasionally, he'll wake up in the night, and I hear him say, "Go away," in his little baby voice, almost angrily. I don't see anything on the baby monitor, but it's positioned over his crib. It doesn't show anywhere else in the room. Other things have happened over the years too, like the TV in the basement is turned on by itself a few times, volume full blast. No one uses the TV in the basement. And the weird thing was, I couldn't turn it off at first. The remote was just not responding. There's also a mirror that we have in the front hallway. I admit that it's creepy in a way that I didn't realize until my now 2-year-old pointed it out. I may post a pic at some point, but whenever my 2-year-old sees it, he says, "Clown, mummy." It's a decorative mirror, no clowns or anything, but if you look at it, You may or may not see why it's creepy because it's an antique that a designer picked out years ago. Anyway, at this point, I'm really not sure what to do, if anything. I've tried sage, I've said prayers, and it seems to get better for a while, and then the odd things start up again. I love my home, and I'm accustomed to the creepy areas, and at this point, I just live with it. My 2-year-old does love playing in his room during the day, but prefers to be downstairs in the playroom at night time. This story goes back a few years ago when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day I'd walk the 25 or 30-minute journey to and from school. There was a shortcut that I would take home that took some time off the walk, and as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable. Whenever I would walk home alone, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest that we have in the medium-sized, moderately busy city that I live in. My shortcut was pretty well travelled, and I would occasionally see other people walking from their neighbourhood towards the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from my high school or the college. Sometimes there would be no one but just me on the path. To give you a bit of an idea, the path definitely was not groomed, but it was travelled enough that you could make out a path from being trampled over the years. The shortcut started off from the busy road by my high school and went into a low-lying open wooded area with small ponds. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up to the big hill towards the street parallel to my street. Now, one day, I was walking home from school after staying a bit late for extra help. A few minutes into my shortcut, I noticed a guy standing off the main path a bit, seemingly just minding his own business and talking on a cell phone. There was an open backpack sitting on the ground by his feet. Growing up with overprotective parents and in martial arts, I've always been a very cautious person and taken a lot of details, especially being a young girl out walking alone. This wasn't unusual by any means, since the entire low-lying area is travelled and there are numerous paths off the main path leading different directions, since it isn't a thick forest, sort of like a free-for-all for walking. Sometimes people would stand off the busy road while waiting for the bus stop close by too, not wanting to stand in all the traffic fumes while people sped by during rush hour. The only thing that I took caution of was that I'd been seeing him there a few times that week and had never seen him there before. But, oh well, maybe he was just a college student or just moved into the area, who knows. This time, walking on the shortcut felt different though. Possibly because there was no one else on the path today, but I just started to get this bad feeling in my stomach. The one everyone has a hard time describing, but most people know too well. Something just wasn't right. I was already well along my shortcut though, and I decided to just blame my feelings on me being paranoid, which is not too uncommon for me. I kept an eye on him out of my peripheral vision walking by, and he continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious. So I just continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters away when the guy stopped talking on the phone, and I felt an even bigger feeling of dread in my gut. I turned around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth and a brown glass bottle. Before I even get a second to register what the hell he was doing, his head shoots up in my direction, and the look in his eyes is a terrifying mix between I've been caught and I'm not stopping now. He drops everything, leaving everything behind, and starts sprinting straight for me, cloth in hand. At this point, I'm too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me in the low-lying woodland, with this crazy guy anyway, and I'm too far away to scream bloody murder. My first instinct, though, in that split-second decision, is to run towards my neighbourhood. I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack on the ground and sprinting as fast as I could, starting up the hill towards my neighbourhood. Judging by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in two with no effort, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Plus, I didn't know what the heck he had in his hand. Luckily for me, all throughout school I'd been the top cross-country and track runner in my entire school, out of the female and male teams. My running had been my saviour on a few other worthy occasions, but soon into the chase, I knew that it wouldn't be enough this time. This guy was fast, and I could tell that he was slowly gaining on me without even looking back. I finally see him fenced in backyards up ahead, and hoping people are home from work, I start trying to scream help as much as I could with my out-of-breath, useless voice. I make a split decision to start jumping fences of people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills are crappier than his running. The first fence throws me off, but by the second into the next yard, he's on my ass and I feel him come insanely close to grabbing my leg. I'm crapping myself at this point. I see no cars in driveways, no sign of anyone home, and the only thing that's keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state is thinking that I may never see my family or friends again. The next yard belongs to people that I know rather well, including their dog. Necessary background interruption too. This house was close to my street on the street parallel to mine, and I've come to know their dog rather well since they recently moved in. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I would walk to school with her on the street down the hill to the busy street. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac, and usually when kids were walking to school, they would put him in the backyard instead of their front yard, since he would growl and scare the crap out of kids walking by while he was tied outside. I love animals, so every time we'd walk by, I would talk calmly to him through his menacing "I'll mess you up" barks. Every time he'd be slightly less vicious to me, until one day, the nice people who lived there gave me a treat to give him, and after that, the dog was a nice stop on the way to school. And the dog's name is Leo. With that next yard and my newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt hope like I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they let him out into their backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo saw me frantically running toward him, he started wagging his tail, then looked to the guy chasing close behind me, and he started growling. I thought that this was going to be enough to get the guy to leave me alone, but no. He started jumping over the fence the second after I did, but the dog jumped up and his teeth came so close to his face that the creep fell backwards into the other yard straight on his ass as I fell into the dog's yard on my ass. The creep and I stared at each other out of breath for a few seconds while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was assessing if he could take on Leo or not. I prayed that the creep didn't have a knife or something like that. The guy looked angrier than I'd ever seen a person look before, and after a few seconds, got up and just started running back down the hill from where he came. I sat there for a few seconds in just complete shock, and I couldn't move, until my hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and just started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what had just gone down. My house was actually really close now, so I jumped the fence and I ran the rest of the way home and called the cops to investigate and try to find the guy. I gave them the best description that I could after coming practically face to face with him. The dude's bag was gone, and so was every trace of him. They found my poor backpack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me that they'd keep looking. I never did see that guy again, and I didn't hear anything more about it. And after calling the office a few times, I eventually just gave up. They told me that during that time that they'd received sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, but nothing like mine. There were a few missing person cases too, but in a city like the one that I'm from, not the worst, but not the best. You can never connect anything like that, for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, though, the more messed up it is and the more confused I am. First, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch me in the forest before I had no chance to get away, or before another tailgoer possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon on him, or anything except that creepy cloth, and what the hell did he actually have in his hand? My friend thought that it may have been chloroform, but I did some research on it, and apparently it's more a myth that pouring it on a rag and covering a person's face causes them to faint very quickly. Plus, where the hell would you get it, anyway? I live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma. So back in July, the ex and I had just finalized the divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental company or landlords. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops, I'd say. All 15 houses, too, bordered around a man-made lake with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard as well. When you walk out your back door, you can see the lake in front of you and your neighbour's backyard on each side of you. Everyone in the neighbourhood seemed pretty close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or barbecue or having people over to watch sports and whatnot. I was and am still depressed after my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbour, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. And Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. So, my daughter Alice is 4 years old and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. And that's why I was upset when Irma came and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm, she was with her mum. Then obviously the weekend of the storm, she was with her mum. Then on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mum because my power was still out. No AC in Florida is absolutely miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she has the only room with a window that faced the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually, the power came back though, and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. And that was when the nightmare started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought that maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends or one of the teachers at a school or something. Maybe there was a teacher at a school that sang to the kids that she just didn't like. That Saturday night, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look, look." But there was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost, but after I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy, make her go away." Obviously, she's having nightmares, right? I showed her that there was nothing in the closet, nothing under the bed, and there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room, and I quickly fell back to sleep too. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes, though, before Alice comes running into my room screaming, "She's back, she's back." And after this, Alice absolutely refused to go back in her room, so I let her just sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mum and I was still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if and when she started having these nightmares again so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her and she was safe. That night she slept pretty soundly and honestly didn't even make a peep all night. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night and I was sound asleep in my bed. When around 2 a.m. is when I heard it. A woman's voice humming a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming and the soft singing got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I definitely wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had honestly never been so scared and also dumbfounded in my entire life. I was feeling a mixture of just pure terror and disbelief. And then the voice spoke out. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second, and as soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm out of his back door screaming, "Don't you move!" And I ran outside and found him aiming a shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window. The window that I had left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed that it was her. Jean played dumb, said that she was not singing and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said that she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approach her house from the lake, which was absolute bullcrap. Because I definitely heard her singing. She called out to my daughter by name. And yes, it's true that there have been a few gators spotted around the neighborhood, and yes, part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then. But at 2 a.m.? I obviously knew it was bullcrap, and even though neither Steve or his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the look on her face that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo, but this was by far the craziest thing to happen so far. And after this, Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. So, I'm currently going through a pretty nasty divorce. I left my wife about 4 months ago and moved into a house by myself close to work. We have a 4.5-year-old daughter, which I haven't been able to see for the last 4 months because my wife filed an injunction against me. Nothing happened, it was just divorce tactics, but luckily, she recently came to her senses and dropped the injunction, and now I have a 50-50 timeshare with my daughter, which actually starts next weekend. And so, this past weekend, my mum came to town to help me set up the house because, well, I'm a guy and guys have no sense of decor, right? At least, that's how my mum thinks. And when it comes to me, she's probably right, We bought a twin bed for my daughter's room, though. Bought her Frozen, her favourite movie, themed furniture and decor. We got a bunch of knickknacks to decorate the whole house. Candles, pictures, fake plants, rugs, all that stuff. And we did everything that we could to make it more homey. Before we bought all these new rugs and set up my daughter's room, I kept my cat's litter box in my daughter's room for the past 4 months while it was empty. After setting up her room, I moved the litter box to another empty bedroom, and well, my cat didn't like the fact that her box was moved. Apparently she decided that that room was going to be her room, and absolutely refused to use the litter box after it was moved. Instead, she would just crap and piss on all the new carpet anytime my mum and I were out of the house. The entire weekend was pretty much conducted of the two of us, deep cleaning the new rugs with strong cleaning products every time that she would crap on one. When finally, I decided that I'd just put the litter box back in my daughter's room, which is right next to mine, until I could figure out a solution. But trust me too, this is relevant. So fast forward to Monday late afternoon. My mum's flight is at 6 p.m, so we leave the house, go out for one last meal, and I drop her off at the airport. I get home at around 6:30 p.m. to my newly furnished and decorated house. It definitely made me feel more at home. I had no plans that night too, so I spent most of the night just on the couch binge-watching movies and drinking scotch. Around 11:30 p.m, I was pretty hammered and stumbled to my bedroom, closed the door, locked it, because monsters and vampires, and collapsed on my bed, and I passed out instantly. But around 4:30 a.m, I woke up to just the worst smell that I've ever had hit my nose. It was so bad that it actually made me pull out of my drunken sleep. It smelled like a combination of crap, sweaty ballsack, ogre trash, and just bleach, all mixed together. My first thought was the damn cat took another crap on the rug again. I ignored it, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep, but I just couldn't. The smell was that bad. Finally, I got up and I unlocked the bedroom door and peeked out into the living room to see if she left a surprise on the rug for me. But it was clean. I looked in my daughter's room and there was a nice turd in the litter box, so the smell couldn't have been my cat. At least, not what I was smelling. So I just shrugged it off in the end and closed and locked my door and collapsed back on my bed. I laid on my bed staring into the darkness for about 30 minutes trying to fathom what I was smelling. Maybe it's a combination of my cat's crap and all the cleaning products that we used over the weekend. I don't know. Maybe a pipe burst somewhere. Did I forget to take the trash to the curb, and was I smelling all the crap that we threw away over the weekend? But no matter what conclusion I came up with, none of it just made any sense. A little after 5 a.m, I get up and I walk to the bathroom and sit down to do my business. I browse Reddit for a few minutes on my phone until I'm done, and I flush the toilet and then collapsed onto my bed again. You know that draining sound the toilet makes after you flush it? So I'm laying there on my bed listening to the toilet do its drain cycle until it finally stopped, and I was in complete silence. And that was when I heard it. A sniff. and the sound of someone clearing their throat from my closet. I don't know what happened, but I immediately jumped into survival mode. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, unlocked my bedroom door, grabbed my car keys, and I bolted out of the front door and jumped into my car. I started the car, backed out of the driveway, and went into my neighbor's driveway across the street. I shined my high beams at my house while I called the police. They were there within a few minutes. The cops approach my car and I tell them that there's someone in my closet. I sleep in the nude, so the cops thought that I was just some crazy drunk at first. But after 2 minutes of arguing, they went to investigate. They were in there for what seemed like hours too, and sure enough, they came out with a very skinny, obviously homeless black man in handcuffs. They put the guy in the back of one of the cruisers and approached my car to ask me some questions. Apparently, this guy snuck in through the back sliding glass door while I was dropping off my mum at the airport. He admitted to looking for pills or something to pawn for bills when he heard me come home, freaked out, and jumped into my closet. And the smell that I was smelling was his terrible BO coming from my closet 3 feet away from me. And this man was in my house the entire night. What if I didn't smell him and open my closet the next morning while getting ready? Or what if my daughter had been there overnight? The whole thought just gives me shivers. So I was playing poker on a late Sunday night when suddenly I just got a really bad feeling. Chills just ran through me, but I didn't feel sick. I wasn't drunk, tired, or even remotely feeling physically bad. I just had a sudden need to go home and make sure that my mum was safe, so I cashed out my chips and I just left. Disquade followed me all the way home, but I never considered anything out of the ordinary. I figured that I was just thrown off by being out so late on a Sunday. The night was cold and quiet, but no stranger than usual. When I got home, my mother was in the shower. She's an obsessive late-night cleaner, a habit beaten into her by her abusive stepmother. I called out to her that I was home, and she was very relieved. I went to hang up my winter gear by my window, and that was when I saw it. We lived across from a park, and floating down the sloping hill towards my apartment was a massive hooded figure composed of just tattered shadows. It was blacker than the surrounding night, and seemed to warp the space around it somehow. It moved fluidly and with clear agency, floating like a squid through water, and I have never felt terror like that. I knew that I was seeing something that I had no business seeing. It wasn't thrilling or exciting, it was just awful. This was before smartphones too, but the thought of trying to snap a photo with a digital camera never crossed my mind. The truth is, I wouldn't want to. I felt an awareness from this thing, and it was not friendly. I felt as though if it knew that I saw it, something horrible would follow. So, in the end, I closed my shades and just hid under my blanket like a little kid. I had the day off the next day, hence the late night, and a friend of mine came to visit. He told me cops were all over the place downstairs. He saw the look on my face, and I told him what happened. He laughed it off. We went to grab some food. I asked the cop what was going on, but they wouldn't answer. We came back and found a young guy wandering my hallway. He was a reporter and asked us if we knew where a woman in the building lived. We asked him if he knew what was going on, and apparently there had been a murder. A man shot his girlfriend and then ended his own life. The murderer's mother lived on the other side of the building, and my friend gaped. No, I didn't hear the shots and then filled in the blanks with an imaginary spectre. I've fired guns since I was a kid, and I know what they sound like. No, I didn't watch a horror movie or have something supernatural on the brain. I've never seen anything remotely similar since. I'm open to the idea of things that we don't understand, but I also understand the importance of healthy skepticism. But I know what I saw, and more even, I know what I felt. It was like peering behind a door that was never meant to be opened. People think that they want to see supernatural occurrences, and perhaps there's a good aspect to them, but I think the truth is that most of us would absolutely freak if faced with something that's not supposed to exist in nature like that. Things like what I saw go against everything that we consider to be right in a very profound way. In New Zealand, we have a lot of walks, and sometimes I like to just drive somewhere and go for a hike into the bush. Normally, I just walk to a point and turn back, but tonight I decided to walk the entire track. This specific track goes from a visitor centre at the top of the hill, then down a hill is the track which takes you past a large old abandoned railway that was once used to show off glowworms and now is just a rusting wreck. I decided to walk down the track though, and it was around 4:30 and it was starting to get a bit dark. So I thought that I would explore a bit and then walk back to my car. About 200 metres from the main station, there's an old tunnel used by the train as well. This tunnel has been abandoned for coming up on 3 years now, so off I go to the tunnel with my little lantern. This tunnel would not have been more than 500 metres long, I'd say. While I was walking, over the sound of my wet slapping footsteps, I swear that I could hear someone following me, breathing on me. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I stop in my tracks and swing around with my lantern. But there's nothing, just a small ball of light from the tunnel opening. So I start walking again, and the feeling returns. Then over my own breath and slapping of my footsteps, I heard something. No, someone. A man in a deep voice, I heard in a dangerous whisper, say, "Get out." And well, you don't need to tell me twice. I felt my large frame running through this small tunnel designed for a tiny train, and I hear the footsteps behind me. The light of the mouth of the tunnel is getting larger and larger. I feel the security of the daylight sort of wash over me. Twist. I tripped over and fell down on my stomach while still in the tunnel. And I felt this presence near me that I tried to get up, but my shoulder is killing me and my legs have decided that they don't want to work anymore. And whatever it was, it didn't want me there and didn't want anyone there. I got covered in mud all down my front. Into the safety of the daylight, though, walking up the railway looking like some awful extra on The Walking Dead. I reached the small station and managed to sit myself down on the long defunct station. Sitting there, I was trying to stretch out my arms so it wouldn't hurt anymore. Then, stretching my legs, I looked up and to my left, standing on the platform as if waiting for a train, was a guy, dressed in brown overalls and a white shirt, looking dirty and disheveled. I looked back down at my foot and turned back to look at this guy again, and to my utter shock, he just wasn't there anymore. I promise you that I'm a pretty big-framed guy, and I've never run so fast in my entire life. Up the hill as well, through the thicket of the forest and back to the safety of the car park. And now I'm sitting in the car trying to process what the hell just happened. And in case anyone was wondering too, yes, I'm able to take photos of this place, as it's not barred to access. But I'm only going back if I'm prompted. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was feeling pretty jaded with the city. She was convinced everything was better on the West Coast, including the people. So, we flew out to Portland and rented a car, which we named Veronica. The day before we were supposed to fly back home, we took Veronica and drove up to Aberdeen, Washington to see Kurt Cobain's childhood home. After that, we drove down the coast, sightseeing along the way. We visited Astoria, Oregon to see the house from the Goonies and ended the day at Cannon Beach to check out the Haystack Rock. All in all, it was a pretty nice day. Once it started to get dark, we decided to head back to our hotel, which was just under 2 hours away. I knew that I needed gas, so I told Jane that I would stop at the first gas station that I see. Cannon Beach is a small resort-type town, a lot of little shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I'm used to seeing 2 on every corner, so I wasn't really too worried. I expected to see one soon. I'm completely unfamiliar with the area though, so I just keep following the GPS's instructions while talking to Jane. Next thing I know, we're not in any type of town, but we're on a dark winding road surrounded by trees. At this point, I'm getting a little worried, so I pull over to the side of the road to use the GPS to search for the nearest gas station. It tells me that there's one about a mile down the road. Awesome. I'll get some gas and we'll be set. So I'm driving and Veronica's telling us that we arrived at our destination. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station. We're still surrounded by woods and darkness. As far as I can tell, there's nothing around for miles. According to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas and the nearest gas station is 30 miles away. Jane and I are sitting there trying to figure out what to do when another car pulls in. I keep going about my business and don't really pay attention to the other car. I just assume that they need gas too, when out of the corner of my eye, I see someone gesturing to me. After some hesitation, I crack the window to see what they want. There's a middle-aged man and his wife in the car. He starts asking us all kinds of questions. Need to fill up? Coming from the beach? Driving back to Portland? I keep my answers polite but short. Then he tells us that he actually owns the gas station we're at, but doesn't make enough money to keep it open that late. He tells us that he knows of a Chevron about 3 miles away and gives us directions for it. He gave us his number and says to give him a call in case we don't make it. He says, "My name is Sam, the mechanic man. Let me know if you don't make it and I'll come and rescue you ladies." We thank him profusely and then we head out. Jane is going on and on about how nice that was and how that never would happen in Chicago. I agreed. That was very nice, if odd of him. Strange, too, that he happened to be driving past his gas station at the same time that we pulled in, but whatever, I guess. I make a joke about him calling his buddy at the gas station saying, "I'm sending 2 women your way." We make it to the place, though, and this kid, 18 or 19 years old, comes out to pump our gas. He asks us how we're doing and then says, "Yeah, there's a lot of weirdos out here tonight." Jane and I look at each other and I let out a small laugh and say, I told you." I turn back to the kid, though, and ask him what he means. He tells me this story about how his brother owes some drug dealer a ton of money and how he's hiding somewhere nearby. He's planning on kicking the crap out of him when he gets off his shift. I can tell Jane is getting uncomfortable with the building weirdness of the night, so I give the kid a good tip and wish him luck and start driving again. At one point during our conversation, Jane calls Sam the mechanic man and leaves him a voicemail. She tells him that we made it to the gas station and how much we appreciated his help. I thought the call was unnecessary. It was what it was. But a few minutes later, we're on the highway and about 10 minutes from our hotel. Jane's phone rings and it's Sam. Again, she thanks him profusely. He asks her where we're from and when we're flying home. He tells her that his name is Sam Glesty and he wrote a book called Wrongly Accused. He told us that we should read it when on our plane ride home. And this definitely piqued my interest. "Hey Jane, you have to look up that book to see what it's about." She Googles it and then she just goes limp and she looks like she's going to puke. "What is it?" I don't want to scare you, but he was apparently accused of being the Green River Killer." And immediately she starts freaking out because he has a number now. Back at the hotel, we do some more digging, and apparently a victim of the Green River serial killer picks Sam out of a lineup. However, the real serial killer was caught and convicted based on DNA evidence. But around the same time in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for abducting and assaulting a young woman in the area that we were in. The book he wrote was about all of that. We ended up stuck in Portland for 2 more days due to a snowstorm in Chicago. It was a weird, tension-filled 2 days. Considering the circumstances and the weirdness of that night, things definitely could have gone horribly wrong. And boy, am I glad that all I got out of that night was a story. This happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, the forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I just declined the offer. Everyone had some except for me, one of the students, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples that we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally come with some rules such as people travel in groups of at least 2 and we had to return to camp by nightfall. But now, those rules were tossed out to make sure that we kept our timetable and collected all the required samples. But we were just told to do our best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream that I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and the soil. This meant that I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, though, I realized that was not going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful, until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't a smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there were still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved, I must admit, that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long and without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and I continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location, late into dusk, that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it too, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous, even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say that I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage to actually know what was going on. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. But even so, I didn't get back to camp until a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because, well, he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after as well. At some point in the night, though, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to do. As I turned to go back to the camp, something caught my eye, though. Somewhere off into the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized that it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while, watching the red ember glow fade, then move slightly closer to the ground as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, though, I assumed that they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to the camp, as quietly as I could though, and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of the cigarettes earlier that day. However, When we got outside of the RV, the ember from the cigarettes was gone. My professor woke up the other student, who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over the camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor, the other student and I went to where I guess the smoker had been standing that night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. And the tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it as the bark and the outer layers of the wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples that we were assigned, to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second that we got onto the paved highway, though, a white-panelled van pulled out of the clearing just off the shoulder and began to follow us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on the weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto the campus. I offered to help the professor catalogue and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple of hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building that I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple of dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes again. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness, off of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smouldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped that it was only a student or some faculty staying late having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, though, as the musty cigarette smell was definitely the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white-panelled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run, and I saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground, and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could definitely hear someone running in the grass off to the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I open the door, jump through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door, and I saw the dark shape stop just before the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two, and then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and a brim of a baseball cap, before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time that I get to my window, overlooking the same yard that I'd just run through, there was no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. So I work in the service industry, beauty and body, etc. A few years ago, there was a very strange and very creepy client that we had who came in for a series of treatments, which meant me and 3 other girls would see him several times a week. He would come for the latest appointment possible, bring weird books about lucid dreaming, and strip down to absolutely nothing but a towel over his junk, even though his treatment did not require for him to be nude. We all agreed that he was a complete weirdo, and after a few weeks, we were free from his crazy ass. Fast forward to this past winter, and he calls in out of the blue, says that he wants to start these treatments again. I begged my boss not to have him come in, but there wasn't really a reason to not have him. Plus, he's in his early 20s, rich kid who will spend all of his mum's money. As he was speaking to me over the phone, he remembered everything about me and began apologizing for being rude to me in the past, which he wasn't, just a freak, and said that he had a huge crush on me, blah blah blah. The first few treatments, my coworker would be with me, but after a few weeks, she couldn't work that late anymore, so I was alone. He constantly tried to keep me in the room with him, first asking questions about the treatment, but then trying to pry into my personal life. He kept complimenting my body and looks, to which I would politely say that that wasn't appropriate, and he would apologize. On more than one occasion, he was definitely high out of his mind, and not weed, and would say the weirdest things. This all doesn't sound too bad, but if you could picture what a serial killer would behave like, from movies and TV, that was this guy. I'm not even joking, he was the scariest person that I've met in my entire life. The day I finally had enough, though, was when he came in wearing a suit, and during the treatment, he complimented me over and over, and then began asking me how I felt about women being raped and murdered, and saying women were horrible and such. I became increasingly nervous, and he would laugh or try and contain his laughter while talking about rape and murder. I can't even remember what he said because I was so scared, and I just blanked everything out. After this treatment was done, I immediately called him a cab. He would usually ask me to do it, but I did way earlier than he would ever ask me. Just before he left, he said, "I find it adorable that you're so vulnerable," and stood there staring at me with honestly the coldest look in his eyes and a slight smirk. I literally almost bawled my eyes out right in front of him. I could feel my heart racing and I was sweating profusely. Before he left, too, he said that he forgot something in the room and stood there waiting for me to go and get it for him. If I had gone into that room, he could have easily followed behind me and blocked the doorway. I could have easily been trapped in there after 8 p.m. in the winter when it's very dark out. The streets around here are dead at this time, and the other tenants in these buildings always leave around 5 or 6. He just stood there, staring at me, and I sat at my desk, literally clutching a pair of scissors away from his view, waiting for him to go in and get whatever it was that he forgot. He grabbed the item, then asked me to help clean up, to which I obviously said no, and locked the door as he was gone. I watched him get into his cab and then ran to my car, literally crying the hardest that I've ever cried in my adult life. He called for several days and tried to explain to my coworker that he thought that he scared me and wanted to apologize. I never spoke to him and told my boss what happened, to which she banned him from ever returning. I don't know if he would have actually attempted anything, but I think the fact that I called the cab earlier without him asking, he knew someone would have been outside, and who knows, maybe that's what deterred him. So my family has some land on a remote-ish mountain just outside of Eureka. I come down here a few times every year and haven't really experienced anything too out of the ordinary. But last night was, well, different to say the least. I didn't know this before, but apparently this area is pretty popular for UFO sightings. I still don't know if that's what this actually is, but I'm having a really hard time coming up with a logical explanation. So, we had a good fire going for a few hours, and after everyone else went to bed, it was just my dad, fiancé, and I left. We were all just shooting the breeze and enjoying the weather and cozy fire. Around 1 a.m., we started talking about constellations, and so we had all leaned back and were just staring up at the sky. My fiancé pointed out a light that was noticeably brighter than all the other stars, and it was steadily moving too. I immediately figured that it must have just been a satellite, but then my dad chimed in with, no, I don't think that is, but watch it for a second. My dad and I are hugely into aliens, and we both have had a fair amount of sightings in the past. I focused closer on the light and saw it wasn't just gliding across in a straight line. It was zigzagging back and forth as if it was moving east. The three of us were exclaiming about how weird it was when it suddenly veered and arced towards the southern mountain. I'm thinking to myself, okay, is this really happening right now? And the light just stops. It just hovers above the mountain for at least 5 minutes, and then we're all saying that it's definitely not a satellite, with the occasional comment like, "Holy crap, this is wild." The light started to shift to the right again until it was behind a tree and we lost sight of it completely. We went back to the normal campfire shenanigans for a couple of minutes, and my fiancé got up to get some drinks. And as soon as he got up, the entire sky just lit up in an almost painful bright white flash, like lightning on steroids. This was a crystal clear night. There wasn't a storm on the radar for miles and miles. We couldn't even see one little wispy cloud. It absolutely could not have been lightning. My dad and I were the only ones who saw it, as most people were asleep and the fiancé was inside. There wasn't a single sound when it happened, and there was no boom or rumble or anything. But the entire mountain went dead silent for a few minutes afterwards. It was really eerie. It's like time around us just paused momentarily or something. My dad ended up feeling so uncomfortable and anxious about it too that he just eventually went to bed. The two of us stayed up for a while after that, but we didn't see any more weird lights or flashes. But I definitely felt a heavy sense of unease around us for the rest of the night. My boyfriend and I have been together for 9 years now. I've always suffered from night terrors, but that's not something that you bring up on your first date. This was back when my boyfriend and I had been dating for a few months and had recently started sleeping together. So, we were sleeping at his place. I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that we were holding hands. I thought it was cute, but I noticed that his hand was really pale and thin. My boyfriend actually has hands a bit like an orc. My eyes got used to the darkness, and I saw his hands were crossed on his stomach while I was holding a third pale hand. As I became aware of this, something that looked like a woman with long black hair hanging over her face sat up from behind my boyfriend's form, looked at me, and laid back down. I stroked a hand with my thumb as you do when holding hands with someone. I don't know why I did that. I just wrote it off as dream logic. This was in the beginning of our relationship, so I didn't tell him about it because I didn't want him to think that I was crazy. Years passed, though, and we're now living together. He's very aware of my paranormal beliefs and night terrors. When out of nowhere, I came to remember this dream. I said to him, "Hey, did I ever tell you about that night terror that I had at your house when we just recently got together? I saw someone who looked like Sadako in your bed when we slept. I almost got jelly." I joked, but he didn't laugh. He got very pale and said, "Wait, did she try to hold your hand?" I got taken aback by his reaction, and I told him that I did hold her hand and even remember stroking it with my thumb. My boyfriend then revealed to me that as a child, he'd have a reoccurring nightmare that a woman with long black hair and white hands tried to hold his hands, but he'd wake up in a panic before she ever got to him. He'd never told me this because he just wrote it off as a childhood nightmare. He'd never told me this because he just wrote it off as a childhood nightmare. But now, neither of us think that they're nightmares anymore. I am newly moved, 21 male, into my house, and I'm still not 100% familiar with my own neighborhood yet. The way the neighborhood was built makes it a rectangular shape, laying down on its long side, with my house being at the top right-hand corner of it. Sorry if that's confusing, but it's the best way I can describe it. So, the other night, around 12:30 a.m., I was at home alone when I decided to take a break from playing guitar and having a smoke before bed. So I grabbed a smoke and started out my front door. About 3 or so minutes into my cigarette, I noticed this faint noise of what sounds like an old creaky metal object that needs to get oiled. But the sound was a cadence which makes it repeat every 2 or 3 seconds. After this happened for about 10 seconds, I noticed that I can hear tires gripping the road as well. Then, out of nowhere, I see a man, who looks to be in his mid-40s, riding this horrible beaten-down bike that emitted a very intense, ear-piercing, high-pitched squeak every time he pedaled. As I stood in my driveway and he passed me, he kept moving forward, but his head slowly rotated left and he locked eyes with me. I am not kidding when I say, too, that this guy looked identical to Hannibal Lecter from the movies. But that's not what made my heart drop. As I'm locking eyes with him and he's moving past my driveway, he suddenly gives me the scariest and most widest, scariest jagged-toothed smile that I had ever seen in my life, and continues to lock eyes with me. And this was no ordinary smile, too. I'm talking a when the Grinch stole Christmas ear-to-ear smile. Within 15 seconds or more, he continues pedaling and is out of sight. I can now just faintly hear his bicycle gears squeaking. At this point, I'm wondering whether or not he's going around my rectangular block of a neighborhood, and whether or not I can chief this cig fast enough to get inside before he comes around again. As I'm doing this, I begin to hear the metal creak noise, but also I hear something different. I hear this dude laughing like a maniac, which, to be honest, made me nope the hell out of there. As I'm stumbling from my door handle because of the adrenaline rush, he begins to round the corner where my door is almost in view. At the exact moment where I would have become visible, I got my door open, ran in, and slammed it shut and locked it. No sooner does my door close do I hear the man from outside scream, as loud as can be, "Where'd you go?" and just begins laughing like a crazy man. I went into full-out battle mode, ran around my house and turned all the lights off, battle crawled to my bedroom and waited. As I lay on my bed for the next 30 minutes, I would hear the squeaking of the bike for about 30 seconds every 3 to 4 minutes. About 30 to 45 minutes later, it finally stopped, and the man was gone. I have actually quit smoking since then and haven't been outside that late, but every now and then, around 2:30 in the morning, I still hear the squeaking of the bicycle from outside my room window. I don't know who he is or what he wants, but this guy, he's creeping me out. So, I'm not sure I know where to start with this one, as it happened 10 years ago and trauma makes the memory fuzzy, but I'll try my best to be precise and accurate in my telling of this. For some context, I'm a short, almost 5-foot female, who is definitely on the fluffy side. Bob is incredibly tall, probably the tallest person you'd ever meet, with huge gouged ears and can, when angry, look quite intimidating, but has never hurt anyone ever. He's the kind of guy that nurses birds back to health, if you get my drift. So I grew up in a small town, big enough to have a Walmart at the time, but small enough that you knew everyone and everyone knew you. In high school, one of my best friends dated this guy that we'll call Adam. He was a grade higher than us and generally popular. At the time, I didn't think much about him, other than that he was my friend's boyfriend. He was likable to almost everyone, charismatic, seemingly intelligent. There were other things at the time in hindsight that I should have seen, but was blinded by youth and ignorance. Fast forward a little bit, I'm 17, graduated early and off to college. I'm a minor in a new town over 2 hours from home, knowing nobody and living in the college dorms. It was co-ed and a few people I knew from my hometown, but they were older than me since I was going to college early and didn't have a strong relationship with any of them. My first day, I come to the dorm and see Adam is the male RA for my floor. Yes, I think to myself, I'm so glad that I know someone here. We chat for a while and I unpack my stuff. My parents and I look around the campus and drop me off, giving lots of hugs and waving goodbye and all that good stuff. I'm excited and terrified to lead my new adventure of independence. When I get back to my dorm, on my door is a piece of paper that reads something along the lines of, "Due to improper moral conduct, you have been expelled from college and should leave immediately," or something to that effect. I open the door and see all of my belongings are gone. I run downstairs and show the paper to the front desk in tears, and they help me figure it out. And lo and behold, Adam, the RA, had pulled a prank and moved all of my things, underwear and fiddly bits included, into his room. I was furious, when in retrospect I should have been terrified. but laughed it off and unpacked my stuff again. It was my first day. I was young. I didn't understand that I should have nipped it in the bud right then and there, but it's where this story really begins. So Adam didn't get into any trouble from that instance, but over the next year he would occasionally play pranks on me and other residents that were above the threshold for appropriate. At the time, I was beginning to think that he was just weird, but nothing besides the first time was so overt that I couldn't write them off as actions of the young and dumb. Fast forward 2 years, my boyfriend at the time, future husband too, who we'll call Bob, and I have been living off campus in these super crowded apartments. There was at one time 7 people in a 3-bedroom apartment. But we decided when our lease was up that we would move into a larger place and sublet. We found a nice apartment across town that had 4 bedrooms, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. There were 2 bathrooms, and 1 upstairs and 1 downstairs that were in the middle between the 2 bedrooms. Each bathroom had a door leading into each bedroom, and the downstairs bathroom had a 3rd door leading into the living room. We signed the lease in our name only and got permission to sublease under our name. It meant, though, that we were personally responsible for any damage and the full rent amount as the lease was in our name. And here is where we made our first mistake. Adam and his then wife had recently been kicked out of their apartment. Being the nice and generous people that we were, we offered to sublease to them month to month. They both had steady jobs and Pell grants, so I knew that they could afford the rent, and Adam was in ROTC and seemed to be on the straight and narrow for the most part. We also put feelers out to other friends and found another hometown guy to rent out one of the rooms, but he couldn't move in for 90 days, which at the time was fine. As we're moving into the new place, Adam and his wife offered to help, and we discover that a lot of our stuff went missing or was broken. We're pretty pissed, but there's nothing to be done about it, and didn't know for sure who did it. The second that all of our stuff is over to the new place, I've discovered Adam and his wife had filled the entire house with their stuff. Sofas, kitchen utensils, etc., etc. It's fine though. I don't mind sharing space, I think, and I just let it go. I worked during the day and went to school and slept during the night. Adam and his wife went to school early in the morning, slept during the day, and worked overnight shifts as security guards. I started noticing very expensive electronics come into the house though. I rarely saw Adam and his wife, but on occasion I would ask, "Hey, how much was that brand new projector?" And Adam's response was covered by the worksite's insurance. It made me uncomfortable, but again, he was a prankster and maybe he was just kidding. I mean, his family was very wealthy. Maybe there were presents, right? About a month passes and things are starting to get weird though. Each room had a separate deadbolt to it, so you could keep your room locked with a key only you had. I had asked Adam and his wife not to get into my room, thinking back to the dorm days, and I came home a number of times during the day to find things moved around. I thought it was just my imagination at first, or perhaps Bob, but he vehemently denied moving things around. I started to test a theory by telling Bob that I was going to place X on the nightstand, Y on the dresser, and Z on the windowsill and not touch them. I would come home and X, Y, and Z would be in completely different places. I thought that I was going crazy. My room was deadbolted, so I started to try and figure out what the hell was going on when I noticed that the handle to the bathroom door that faced the living room had been flipped around. So it couldn't be locked from the inside. Weird, I thought to myself, but maybe it had always been that way. So, being the handy person that I was, I grabbed my screwdriver and flip it back around. Problem solved. I leave a little note on the kitchen counter saying something along the lines of, "Hey man, I fixed the downstairs bathroom. I'm going to keep it locked for my privacy. Let's have a house meeting soon. Let me know when you're available and we'll talk about it." I wanted to ask him if he'd been getting into my room and then set some boundaries. The next day, the note was gone, but no response. I left for my daily activities to come back and find my room had been thrashed. My small rodent pet had been taken outside onto the patio in its cage with the door open. Obviously, I'm livid. I check my door, still deadbolted. I check the bathroom door, still locked. but find Adam had removed the door to the bathroom going into the empty downstairs bedroom, allowing him access to my room via the spare bedroom. And I mean, what the hell, right? I leave another note on the counter, this time explaining, look, we need to talk, whatever is going on is not cool. At this point in time, they were never home as I was. He had actually been fired from his night watch job, due to things going missing I'd assume, and gone full force into his ROTC training. I didn't know where both of them were most of the time. I was working 40 hours a week and taking 30 credits and doing undergraduate research, so I was rarely home. Bob was working 2 jobs too and having to scooter across town, and then would come and see me after school on campus, so he was also rarely home. We found out later that Adam had actually been kicked out of college due to his behaviour too. Time passed though, and there was still no contact. I knew that they were still living there though, as stuff was moved around, but I never saw either of them. I stayed in my room for much of that period of time as I thought that I was going crazy. My brain kept telling me that I'm being unreasonable, maybe there is a reason. But then one day, Bob and I come home, and the door to my bathroom that faces the living room was completely gone. Just gone. This meant that, to pee, you had to do it in the open with the whole kitchen and living room being able to see you, and all the stuff in my room was absolutely trashed again. My pets were outside again, my boyfriend's scooter was outside, clothes strewn about, stuff was missing, and that was the last straw. I leave a note explaining that this isn't cool and put the back door on. I received a note the next day saying that they removed the door because it's unfair we have to walk upstairs to use the bathroom if we're in the living room, and you kept locking the door. But the door was not replaced. I called up the apartment complex and explained what was going on and asked if we could break the lease in the next month and transfer it to a studio apartment. They agreed and the plan was set. After talking to the apartment for a while, we found out that Adam and his wife had been trespassed from the property prior to moving in and failed to mention that to us. So again, I left a note on the kitchen counter, in not so nice of a tone this time, saying, "Hey, the lease is in my name. You are here by my grace alone on a month-to-month sublet. I was trying to be cool, but this is too much. You've removed my ability to have privacy in my own bathroom and keep getting into my room. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. I'm ending your sublease due to invading my privacy on multiple occasions and destroying apartment property. I have tried to talk to you about this, but you have not responded. I feel that we're in an impasse, so please take this as your 30-day notice eviction." At this point in time, I'd also given my pets to a good home, as I feared for their health due to the current situation. I made it a point for Bob and I to be away from the apartment for 2 days to give everyone time to calm down. I get home and the note is gone. Nothing in its place. I go to my room and Bob and I settle in. Tomorrow we start packing the non-essentials so we can move at the end of the month. 5:30 and I hear a knock on the door. "Who is it?" "It's Adam." I go and unlock the door, thinking he's come to talk about the eviction notice, and crack open the door just slightly. And there, right in my tiny little face, is a gun. I can see straight down the barrel to Adam's calm, expressionless face. I scream and slam the door closed, twisting the deadbolt shut just in time. Bob is awake now, and he's running to the bathroom door and making sure it's locked. Adam starts slamming his body against the door and screaming, "I'm going to kill you." This goes on for maybe 15 minutes. I'm amazed that the door held up, to be honest. When suddenly, it just goes completely quiet. Too quiet. I listen to see if I can hear what's going on outside. And as soon as I can, I run across the room and grab my old faithful Nokia phone and call 911 and explain the situation. The operator states there's a patrol car already on its way. That's weird, I think. But Bob and I huddle in the closet and wait. A knock comes at the door a few minutes later. I try to get out, but the sheer force of Adam's rage against my door has bent the deadbolt, and it's hard to open now. So Adam gets to the front door first. Him and his wife are talking to the officer by the time that I get out of my room. They're all well-dressed, calm-looking. I'm in my PJs and sweating, tears running down my face. Bob is also disheveled. They're explaining to the police how they came to talk to us about an unfair 30-day eviction notice when we freaked out and began threatening them with violence. I try to explain my side of the story. A second officer arrives and pulls them outside to talk. I can hear that he goes on to explain that as the honourable ROTC soldier or police officer, he was just a security guard, and his wife, who miraculously was now pregnant, he was frightened for their lives when I started to threaten violence, and worried about the health of their baby. I realised in that moment too, so many life lessons. Be the first to call the police. Make sure you know your optics. Learn the signs of a psychopath. And most importantly, don't have roommates. I tried to explain the situation to the officer, told him about the gun, showed him the deadbolt. But again, being young and dumb and terrified, I didn't have any pictures of the mess that they'd made in my room, or the door that they had removed, or any of the other weird stuff. I told the officer about how they'd been trespassing off the property, how they weren't technically on the lease, how I suspected him of stealing from his work, etc., etc., but it all came down to a sleep-deprived, adrenaline-high ramble. Adam calmly handed a copy of his sublease and eviction notice to the officer, who proceeded to thank Adam for his service. I knew at this point that I was done for too. The police informed Bob and I that we had to allow Adam and his wife the full 30 days, that we were not to talk to them or interact with them in any way during that 30 days, or Adam could call back and Bob and I would be arrested for continuing harassment. For the rest of the month, Bob and I stayed in our room, only beelining for the door to go to work and come back. Every time we tried to leave to go into the kitchen or living room, there would be Adam telling us to go back in our room or he called the cops. If we had had any money whatsoever, I definitely would have rented a hotel room, but with the fees for breaking the lease, plus college, we were pretty much broke. For 30 days, he and his wife held us in proverbial hostage in our rooms. Finally, the night before the last day, I put out a note asking him to leave his keys so I can return them to the office. And guess what? He calls the police. This time, I make sure I control the optics, though. I'm dressed in the most innocent way possible, and try to explain how for 30 days I've been prevented from leaving my room, terrified of this man with a gun, and how I didn't want to break what the officer had asked of me last time, no contact, by leaving the note. I also had a letter now from the apartment complex stating that they were trespassed. The officer takes his keys and gives them to me. They finally move out, and as I'm doing my final walkthrough, I find that he has overflowed the upstairs bathroom with water and put a hairdryer in the sink and rigged it to turn on when I open the door. Joke's on them though, as there was a GRE switch that they plugged into it, and countless toys, if you catch my drift, strewn throughout the place. Bob and I moved into our studio, but for years afterwards we would find ourselves somewhere and notice Adam behind us, following us wherever we went. The gaslighting had been so bad that it took a long time to realize that we weren't actually crazy. I had nightmares of that month, of hiding, of him shoving the gun in my face, of being somewhere and him just turning up. The sheer sight of him made me so nauseous, and I would vomit on more than one occasion. After college, Bob and I moved back home though. We were living our lives and the event was far behind us. When one day I buy a newspaper to see the front page reads, "Local hometown hero Adam to have parade in his honour," and an account of how he had injured his leg while serving. And yep, there was indeed a parade. I did some research though and found out that he had joined up after college and only served 2 years and never even made it to overseas before he blew up his own leg while messing around. And so I guess you could say that there is some karma in the world. And to this day in my hometown, he's still considered an honoured, disabled veteran. So before I begin the story, I feel it's important that I give out a few details first. So me and my 3 close friends like to drive around and walk around spooky places, as we generally get bored with our university nightlife fast and need something to sort of excite us. All of us are also big believers in the supernatural, and 3 out of 4 of us have experienced some sort of paranormal experience. All of us are from Malaysia, and we Malaysians tend to believe in a lot of supernatural stuff, as it's woven tight into our history and culture. Now, Malaysia had a terrible incident back in 98 or 99, don't really remember, where 2 apartment buildings collapsed due to uneven lands. Majority of the tenants of those 2 apartments died, and what's worse is that a number of them didn't die when the building crashed, but died due to a lack of oxygen. You can actually Google it too. The building is Highland Tower. So we decided to go to the area nearby there, as the site where the tragedy happened is closed, though there are no guards on patrol. Just outside the gates is a small neighbourhood, and boy, is that neighbourhood creepy. You can actually see the area that is the rich area, and yet a good amount of the houses were empty. But what's stranger though was the fact that the whole neighbourhood was absolutely quiet. It's a very uncommon thing in Malaysia, as we're pretty loud here, and it felt as if everyone just decided to up and leave that area. So as we walked around, a couple of strange things happened. First, the dogs in the neighbourhood started barking at plein air. We Malaysians believe that when dogs start to do that sort of stuff, it means that they are seeing something that we aren't able to see. So we decided to avoid any area which the dogs are barking at. It's important to note that we made a few rules before doing all of this. Again, a Malaysian thing, I suppose, but 1. Don't call out real names, use nicknames. This is so that any wandering spirits won't be able to attach itself to you. 2. Don't look back if you feel a presence. This is often a big mistake, as even if you look behind to find nothing, you've actually just shown the spirits around you that you've noticed them. And 3. Don't make loud remarks about strange things. We believe that if you see, hear, or smell anything strange, it's best to just keep it to yourself. If you need to tell someone, then just use hand signatures or make some excuse to sort of hint at them. This is similar to the second one, as any remarks could easily attract unwanted attention. So, as we walked throughout the neighbourhood, we heard footsteps behind us. Remembering the rules, none of us looked back though. And you see, the footsteps were odd, as they just sort of randomly appeared out of nowhere. The footsteps also started to get faster, so one of our group mates, the expert as we call him, led us to the exit using a shortcut as it was getting too uncomfortable. And here is where things went down. See, the expert is one of those guys who can see things, or at least feel it to a certain extent. Now, because we're big believers, we don't actually question him. We just follow, as we all want to get through this as clean as possible. The expert is also my best friend, and he often brings me to the side to whisper to me if anything is really wrong and close to being dangerous. The place where we had parked our car was directly beneath this huge tree, so my best mate called me to the side and whispered to me, "Dude, don't panic, but when you get to the car, keep quiet and make sure the others keep quiet too until we reach a place with more people." And why? Well, there's a woman on the tree above your car, and she's been looking at us since just now. Following his advice, I went on and started the car like usual while making some small jokes, trying to take everyone else's attention away as I reversed the car. Both my mate and me noticed in the reverse camera that there was a clear shadow of a woman sitting down on top of the car. Again, not wanting to scare everyone else and to antagonize it further, we just kept quiet. We went to a nearby restaurant and sat down for a while. The woman was still on the top of my car, according to my mate, and was hiding itself. The worst case scenario is that it follows us back to our university dorm and decides to latch itself onto us. So I told the guys that when we entered the car that I'm going to play a special prayer recording out loud, using the auxiliary cord while also reading the prayers myself. I'm not a super religious person, but I do believe in God and his protection. And if the plan didn't work out, then we would just drive around or hang at a McDonald's until 5 a.m. because that's the holy time for my religion, and the woman would hopefully disappear. We eventually entered the car, and I immediately started playing the prayers. My mate was driving this time, as I wanted to focus fully on the prayer. And the moment that I started, the car suddenly got really heavy, as if there was an extra passenger there where there shouldn't have been. I continued with the recording along the journey, and to my shame, I actually fell asleep halfway. By the time I woke up, it was near 2 a.m, and we reached the dorms already. According to my friend, the prayers worked, but took quite a bit of time, as the woman only let go as we were entering the university area. I asked if he noticed anything strange, and he said that all 3 of us actually fell asleep. And He heard someone huffing and puffing, but in a really angry way. He also noticed that several times the prayer recording just got interrupted as the volume went up and down as if someone was trying to purposely mess with it. Thankfully, the woman got off and we've not since went back to the neighborhood area. Being followed that one time was definitely enough for me. I think that there's something strange living in the woods near my house. I live in a rural area in Mississippi. I won't say exactly where for privacy reasons, and the area is surrounded by a vast forest that is littered with deer camps and thick foliage. I've seen something weird in there too since I was 13, but before I get into that, I want to give some context. My family has lived on the property since my grandparents moved there to start a family. My dad and his siblings all grew up there. Then my dad and my mum moved into the house next door, and my uncle moved into the house down the street. From there, I lived in the house for the next 18 years before I left for college, and I've since moved to a nearby town. The property itself holds several acres of dense woodland, hills and steep embankments, with several footpaths tracing throughout that lead to deer camps and hunting stands. Some of the paths also lead to hunting camps that belong to other people who live in the area. So, when I was 13, I was walking along one of those paths when I heard a tree branch break and something land with a loud thud a couple of yards off the path. I looked over just in time to see something humanoid barreling off into the forest on all fours. It was naked and its skin was paper white. But that was all that I could discern. I could only see it for a couple of seconds before it just disappeared. I didn't see it again for several weeks, until I was coming out of the forest through a path behind my grandparents' house. It was raining, and I was running to make it back home when I heard something shuffling around in one of the sheds in my grandparents' backyard. I thought that this was weird, considering the sheds were full of clutter and old junk that we didn't even use, so there shouldn't have even been anyone in there. But I looked inside, and that was when I saw what I've come to call the Pale Man up close. It was completely hairless and crouched down into the piles of junk with its back turned to me. It was very thin, with a human-like body, with visible ribs and strangely long limbs too. It looked back over its shoulder to look at me, and I could see that it had deep black eye sockets with wide eyes staring back at me. It didn't have any lips, just teeth, and a mouth pulled back in a horrible grimace. It also didn't have a nose, and it screeched at me, and that was when I ran straight back to my house. I told my dad what happened, but when he looked to check the shed, gun in hand, he just found it completely empty. The next sighting isn't actually mine, but one I learned of by complete happenstance. I was participating in summer work programs this past summer, and I struck up a conversation with one of the other participants while we were waiting for orientation to begin. It came up that we were both interested in Native American folklore and urban legends, when he asked me if I'd ever heard of the rake. Since the rake is the closest thing that I've been able to find appearance-wise in regards to what I saw all those years ago, I told him my story. And he looked shocked when I told him this, and lamented that he had had a similar experience, and the details shook me to my core. It happened in 2014, the same year as my experience, in fact. It was deer season, and he was sitting up in his deer stand before the sun came up. While he was waiting, he heard something scaling the side of his deer stand, which stood 15 feet in the air. He looked over and saw a skeletal face peering into the window. Something was clinging to the side of his stand. Whatever it was startled and fell to the ground. He heard it thump against the ground and watched it limp off into the forest. He described it as looking like the Wendigos from the game Until Dawn, a point that I also made to my college friend who introduced me to the game. I asked him if he could take me to the place that he saw it, but he said that he doesn't visit that stand anymore because, well, he's too afraid. I still asked him what general area it was in so I could drive through the area and see if I found anything, and he did give me an answer, and this is what really startled me. I can't give the exact address, again for privacy reasons, but he said, "So you know where such and such road meets such and such road? It was right up the road from there." and my house was directly on the intersection of those two roads, meaning that whatever he saw was in the general vicinity of the thing that I saw. I didn't get any more information out of him after that, but I suspect that it happened at one of those deer camps that are connected to my property. This definitely spurred me to look into the matter a bit more seriously as well. I considered myself an amateur paranormal investigator, and have been going on searches throughout the area in previous weeks. Every now and then, I'll hear something really big walking out of sight in the forest nearby, either obscured by trees or on the opposite side of the hill that I'm walking around, somehow always being out of sight. It will walk in sync with me too, and when I stop walking, I'll hear it take a few steps before it stops, restarting only when I started walking again. An incident like this happened about a week ago when I heard it trailing directly behind me as I made my way following a small creek just off one of the paths. There was a steep hill on my right side, and I walked around the hill and started going in the opposite direction. I could still hear the creature on the other side of the hill, and I looked up and I could have sworn that I saw something humanoid moving at the top of the hill, ducking to hide behind a thick tree. The hill was too steep for me to climb up to the top and investigate, so I missed out on that opportunity. I'm not 100% sure that I actually saw something in this instance too, so it was just a fleeting glimpse. But I do know that I didn't hear any more footsteps following me after this, which was definitely weird. But anyway, I went for a full-blown stakeout just yesterday. I camped in a clearing next to a deer stand, which is only a couple hundred yards from where my friend had his first sighting, and an even shorter distance to where I had my first sighting. I revisited the area where I had my sighting, and saw something that piqued my curiosity. The area is full of very steep hills and washouts where rainwater erodes the dirt between the hills, making the area very precarious. And there was a downward slope just off the path where I had my encounter, and I saw a collection of sticks stacked together against a tree in the washout. I actually climbed down into the washout to investigate this further, and the sticks were assembled almost like a lean-to against the tree, but they also curved, kind of in a bowl shape almost. It looked like something had been woven together, a nest out of twigs, something about the size a man could fit in fact. It also used large branches, sometimes 3 inches thick, to strengthen the structure. I don't know of any local animal that could have built something like this, and I don't think it was naturally occurring. But if this was the work of the Pale Man, I don't think he'd used it recently. I couldn't find any bones or droppings or footprints or any sign of something actually living in it. I did take pictures of this nest though, and I can actually upload them if you guys would like to see them. But after this, I then returned to my tent and watched the area until the sun went down and I went to sleep, planning to wake up around 3 a.m. to perform my stakeout. When the time came, I stayed inside my tent and looked out into the night through my tent window. I soon discovered, though, that it was incredibly hard to see in this much darkness, and I couldn't see anything clearly far beyond my tent. But I did see something, however. It was an indiscernible shape situated at the base of 2 conjoined trees. It was way too far for me to discern what it actually was, but I know that it was about 2 to 3 feet tall. I'm sure you're wondering why I didn't use a flashlight, to which my answer is the only one I had available was the one on my cell phone. It wouldn't have been strong enough to reach whatever was resting at the base of the tree. Plus, I was afraid of distressing it and possibly causing it to attack. Although, admittedly, in times that it had been following me through the woods, it's never seemed keen on actually attacking me. It just seems to be curiously observing, just out of sight. But I kept my eyes locked on this shape for several minutes, and it didn't even move an inch. And after about a half an hour of nothing happening, I determined that it must have just been a bush that looked weird in the complete darkness. I was tired too, and what animal could have possibly kept that still for so long, right? So soon after that, I fell asleep, and then I woke up at 8 the next morning. Now, while I was packing up my things, I looked out at the 2 trees where this thing should have been, and there was just absolutely nothing there. Not a bush, not a tree stump. The spot where I saw something was just completely barren, which made me think that maybe there actually was something just watching me. I don't know. I don't know if it means anything, in fact. I don't know if anything happened or if it was a trick of the eyes or what have you, but this is just what I noticed. And that's my story. Like I said, I consider myself an amateur paranormal investigator. I'm only posting this here because, well, I'd love your input on where I should go next with this investigation, as well as any information that you think would help. I will say this though, whatever I did see, it very closely resembled the rake. In fact, that's really the only thing that I've been able to find that matches up with it. That being said, it's very difficult to find any reliable information on the matter, so I figured that I would come here. I'll be continuing my searches throughout the area, and I'll be continuing stakeouts, and I do expect to keep you guys updated if anything comes up. Please feel free to share any questions or theories or even hunting tips, anything that you think might help, because I really want to know what this thing is. So, I think something sinister lives on my parents' old farm. My folks bought the place back in the early 2000s, and since the first time I ever set foot on this property, I just knew that there was something else here. I used to spend summers here as a kid, which is when I experienced most of these happenings. I hadn't been here in 6 or 7 years, but I've recently had several family members pass away, and they all live within a couple of hours of this farm. So that's where we've been staying the nights, while we attend memorial services during the days. Now, this place is absolutely huge, 350 plus acres, cornfields, woods, pastures, ponds, all the good stuff that you'd expect to find on your typical farm. There's a couple of old sheds, the house and a summer kitchen too, which is used as a little cottage now. To the west of the house there are the woods. The front door or the porch face these woods, and this is where one of my first experiences takes place. My aunt and uncle and 2 cousins came out to visit us one weekend. I was really young, maybe around 8. My cousins were a couple of years younger than me, and we were out exploring in the woods. We got pretty far away where we couldn't see the house or hear our parents talking anymore, and we were playing tag. My cousin Megan yelled that she found something, so my other cousin and I went to see what it was. And it was clothes, like an entire outfit. Jean shorts, a shirt, socks, and a pair of underwear. But there weren't any shoes, that we saw anyway. So me being young, I was like, well, that's weird. But to be honest, I didn't think too much of it. So we're running around some more, and I'm hiding behind a tree because we're playing hide and seek. I'm crouched down, and I look on the ground, and I literally see hair. Like a person's ponytail. I mean, it had a tie on it and everything. At this point, even my little kid brain was like, what the hell? I told my cousins that we should probably go back to the house at this point. We started our walk back, and all 3 of us stopped after a few steps and looked at each other. Because we could hear steps somewhere else in the woods. But it was hard to tell what direction that they were coming from. We were super freaked out at this point and took off running back to where our parents were, up by the farmhouse. I told my dad that I found a ponytail and that it looked like human hair, and he absolutely insisted that it was not human hair, that it was a horse's tail that was left there after the horse died. Being 8 years old, I relented rather easily, and I soon forgot about it. I didn't even remember to mention the pieces of clothing that we'd seen too. And within a few days, we'd left to go back home, about 8 hours away, and I completely forgot about the entire experience until I went back the next summer. When we returned, I ventured out into the woods to look for the clothes and all the hair that I'd seen the year before, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. And that summer was when things started happening in the house. So I always wonder if whatever was in those woods finally made its way into the farmhouse. I work for a small technical consulting firm. We have about 10 employees and the 2 owners. Most of us are usually on site with clients full-time. In some cases, though, we have in-house work or jobs that require us to work at the home office. So my last office site gig ended and I had to come to the home office. Home office is a gorgeous, completely updated building 50 miles out of the city in farm country, set about a half mile back on a huge hill with a long driveway, which is the only way in and out. The building is mostly glass, and the parking lot is right behind the building, so I can literally turn around and see my car from where I sit. The office overlooks that driveway too, so we can see anyone driving up, mostly delivery guys. At first, too, it was really peaceful being out there. I'm an early bird, so it was a really pleasant drive out into the farm country. I didn't have to lock my car doors, like I did when I worked downtown. I could gaze out my window at gorgeous green fields, but it could get lonely. Which is why when UPS would show up with a package, I would jump up to meet the delivery guy at the door. Point being, I was hyper aware of when people showed up there and who was actually there. Some days, too, I would be the only person in the office. Some days there were 3 or 4 other co-workers in between assignments or working on short in-house work. Now, one morning, it was just me and one other co-worker here. This particular co-worker and I would walk down the long driveway and back once a day to get some steps in. We did this particular morning and came back into the building, and a few minutes later, he looks over at me and says, "Look at our cars." We had only just walked past our cars a few minutes prior, and now all of the doors to our vehicles were open. All 4 of the doors on each of the vehicles, in fact. And I hadn't heard a thing. I can confirm, too, that no one ever came up that driveway. The nearest farm was like 12 miles away. My co-worker couldn't have done it. He was sitting about 10 feet away from me the entire time. Which meant that there was really only one other option. Someone had walked through miles and miles of cornfields just to mess with our cars. Nothing had been stolen, and my co-worker had been left his iPad on his front seat. We looked around, closed the car doors, locked them, and we just went back into the building, locking the building on the way in. I lock my car doors now, and the door to the building is always locked, whether I'm here alone or not. I'm happy to say that most people in this country go their entire lives without encountering some of the monsters that exist in this otherwise beautiful place. Unfortunately, though, I have not been so fortunate. Before I start, I'd like to bore you with some backstory. So I've been working as an IT systems administrator for a few years now, and have met many people who I occasionally moonlight as a repairwoman for, and yes, I do pay tax. Over the years, friends have told friends, and I occasionally get messages and phone calls from strangers asking for basic computer repairs for cheaper than they would otherwise find locally. For years now, I have been overly cautious of people, places, and objects that just don't feel right. I've learned to always trust my gut instinct and to err on the side of caution too. This story, however, is the one and only time that I ignored that instinct. Around 4 years ago, I was contacted over text message by a local man. He was direct and straight to the point. The conversation was pretty basic. He asked me if I could look at his computer as he heard about me from a friend. I said yes, and he explained the issue that he was having. PC had suddenly just stopped booting, and occasionally he would manage to get it running, but it would operate incredibly slow and crash quickly. I told the man that I would need to inspect the PC myself. However, it sounded like a textbook hard drive failure. I asked the unknown man to call me to discuss an option, and where he could bring the PC to for me to take a look at it. His response was, "No phone calls. Where can I drop it off and when? I need the things off it as soon as possible." This seemed sketchy to me at first. I mean, most people like to talk over the phone about the issues that they're having and try and sort them remotely, and at the very least, know how much it was going to cost. I eventually brushed it off, though, thinking that maybe he was just well off and was looking for a fast turnaround, which he knows only a hobbyist would be able to achieve in this area. I discussed a time where he could drop the PC off at my work, and asked what time would suit him, and he didn't reply. And the next morning, at the door of my work, there was a PC on the ground, with a post-it note crudely marked with my name in black felt tip marker. My boss was not super impressed, as our business is quite strict security, and members of the public are not usually allowed into the premises after hours. I was ultimately very confused, however, because I never got a reply from this man, and as far as I knew, he had just done a runner. By now, I'm pretty convinced that this guy has some sort of social anxiety or something. A refusal to talk on the phone and deliberately dropping the PC off without a word of warning before our business. Not a client-based business too, this is an office block. And again, alarm bells are kind of ringing at this stage, but there was no reason for me to really worry. It's not as if he seemed on edge or dangerous or anything. Not that I could really tell in the few text messages that we sent each other. So, I proceeded as planned. Ran diagnostic tools, confirmed it was a dead drive, removed the drive, replaced it with a repurposed one, reinstalled the OS, and proceeded to start the recovery process. For those of you who are not informed of the process, here's the basic rundown. So, we pull out the hard drive, plug it into the working PC either directly or with a dock, create a clone of the drive, and then perform the recovery using specialized software on the clone. Not the actual hard drive, as it may fail during the process. I did this with good results and managed to recover pretty much everything. I copied all of his files over to his new drive, reinstalled the applications that I could see that he had, and sent the computer on its merry way. Later that day, I sent the man a message stating that his computer was fixed now and he could come and pick it up sometime during the business hours. He responded a few hours later, saying that he was not going to be available until after work. Okay, I thought, that's fair enough, he's probably just working. And at first, the man asked if he could meet me at my house after work the following day, which by this stage was definitely too weird. I obviously declined and insisted on meeting him at the local post office at around 6 p.m. By this stage, I was kind of getting some pretty bad heebie-jeebies. I decided to have a friend come with me just in case things got weird. I have a male friend at work who was happy to come with. We arrive at the post office a little early and sit on the small park bench out the front. About 15 minutes pass and the guy finally arrives. By this stage, it's getting pretty dark. Thinking back now, I am pretty sure he delayed it as much as he could. The man walks up to us slowly in a kind of predatory way, if I had to put it, creeping forward as to make as little noise as possible, even though we knew that he was there. His grey jeans stained with what looked like white paint, wearing a dark hoodie covering his head, and all we can see of his face is the protruding long grey tattered beard. The man stands in front of us while I introduce myself and my friend. The man doesn't react at all, instead seemingly looking me up and down for what felt like minutes. I could smell his breath from where I was standing, and his silence was only broken by the sound of his nose hairs whistling as he breathed. I eventually try and speak to him about his PC, stating that it was in fact a dead drive. However, before I could finish speaking, he interrupts me mid-sentence with a raspy voice, the kind of voice that makes you feel a tingle at the back of your throat, and he says, "Is that the computer?" I responded, "Yes." "Did you get everything back?" The man quickly responded, more of a statement rather than a question. Yeah, I told you in the text message." In a quick and angry voice, he then asked me, "Did you go through any of it?" "Of course not." "Are you sure?" At this point, I was getting really weirded out, and my friend could tell that I felt threatened. I do not deal well with older men, and he knew that, so he swiftly responded with, "Look man, the computer's fixed and you have your data back. Do you want it or not?" I looked at my friend, then back at the man. He looked me up and down one last time, thrusted some notes into my hand, quickly grabbed the PC, and swiftly but silently walked away to the car park. We got back in the car, and I soon realized that he had paid me $400 for a simple repair. I mean, we never discussed the price, as that usually happens early in the discussion, or as they return for their computer, but usually this would only cost about $150. I was shocked, I must admit, but also pretty happy. But my friend, he was not so happy. Hey, something was really off about that guy, and now I'm even more convinced. Did you notice how intent he was on you not going through his data? I agreed. Something weird was going on. Although I'm not supposed to, and doing so is kind of a breach of privacy, my itch to know what he was so paranoid about was really strong. So, the next day at work, having been bugged by my friend, I finally decided to take a look at the contents of the clone drive. And I noticed pretty quickly that it was quite large. Around 250 gigs for what was essentially a Windows install and some basic applications, photos, and a few downloads. It can be tricky to find out what is taking up so much space sometimes, but using a tool like Space Sniffer can really help. I booted the program up and quickly found a zip file hidden in this Windows folder under a very long tree of folders. And inside these folders were other empty folders. Some had empty documents in them, others were completely empty. I jumped straight into the zip file and opened it, luckily not password protected. And what I found inside makes me feel sick, even more so given what I've been through in my life. There were just thousands and thousands of images and videos of children, some suggestive, others more than that, and I opened 3 or 4 photos and immediately felt lightheaded and sick. I quickly closed the zip folder, shocked. Oddly enough, it did not settle in until sometime later what I had found. All I was thinking about before was what would happen if a colleague saw those images in the building. Little did it occur to me what kind of threat this man was, and what now lay on my desk. I told my friend, who told me to call the police ASAP. I did, and was asked not to touch the image further, and to come into the station to make a report with my friend. They later confiscated the drive that I had copied the clone to, and I never got it back. I was told by police a week or so later that the phone number the man used to send me the text messages was a web-based application, and the phone number was actually fake. However, they had identified the man thanks to the metadata stored on the hard drive clone, and that the man probably did not realize a copy was made of his drive in the process of recovery. They also told me that the man was looked for, however, his last known residency was in a different state. The police believe that he was staying somewhere without a lease, with a friend, or simply squatting, and has since skipped town. It's been 4 years now, and I haven't heard anything. I'm still paranoid that he's going to come to my office building again, or follow me home or something. I've surrounded my house with self-defense items just in case, and my home feels safe, but my work, not so much. Like I said earlier, most people go through life without ever seeing the scum of society. I have experienced it myself 3 times now, and at this point, I'm done. Never, ever again will I allow this to happen. So, to start out, I'm fairly skeptical of the paranormal, so I don't really know what to believe about this. But the only stories that are even a little similar to what I've experienced all do seem to be paranormal. So, to give some backstory, my street or neighborhood is pretty quiet, especially at night due to the number of young families and elderly couples that live on my street, which makes staying up into the early hours of the morning more relaxing and also a bit cooler knowing that I'm mostly the only person up on my street anyway. The only thing is that I've had some really strange and creepy experiences, like hearing noises or even seeing a few drug deals, but most of that can be chalked up to living next to a big forest with lots of wildlife or just some sketchy neighbors. But for the past week, I've been trying to find a logical explanation for the strange events that just keep occurring. But let me tell you about it. So it all started at 2 a.m. last Tuesday morning. I was just sitting in bed on my phone with earbuds in, something that I do almost every night, when I began to hear whistling coming out from my window. I took my earbuds out and began listening to the whistling, trying to come up with the explanation for it. Normally, I'm not scared by anything in my neighborhood this late, and to be honest, I get more excited that something's happening and I'm there to witness it. But this time, it just felt different. I wanted so badly to get up to look out of my window, but I was almost paralyzed with fear. I don't know what came over me, but every minute that went by of this whistling, I felt the pit in my stomach just grow larger. It went on for almost an hour as well, and for the entire hour I waited for the whistling to start a tune or a song that I could look up. But it just kept whistling the same note in a really strange pattern. It would whistle one note for a good minute, then take a break for about 30 seconds, and then return to its 1-minute whistle, until about 20 minutes in when the whistles got shorter and closer together, only to return to the original pattern after about 10 minutes. What was even more strange was that whatever it was pacing in front of mine and my neighbor's house, up until it stopped when it retreated back to the other side of the street. As I heard it leave, I almost immediately felt the pit of my stomach subside too, and while I was still confused, I decided that I should just go to sleep before I scare myself even more. So, the next day, I asked my parents and even some of my friends that live close by if they had ever heard anything like that. Everyone assumed that it must have been an animal, which made me feel a lot better, I admit, but I wanted a definite answer of what I heard. I stayed up for hours that night researching types of animals that were local to my area and the noises that they made. And in the end, I just didn't find anything that matched. This only left me more frustrated that I had no clue what it was, so I continued staying up in the hopes that I would hear it again, and that this time I would look out my window to see it. But with my luck, I never heard the whistles again, except lots of other weird things have been happening. After the whistle, for instance, I began hearing someone or something walking around in mine and my neighbours' driveways and sometimes even yards very late at night. But the really strange thing is that whenever I go to check, I can't see anything. Then, about 2 nights ago, I swear that I saw a figure of a person lurking behind my neighbour's car. Then the night after that, I saw what looked like a flashlight in the woods near my house, and whatever it was holding the flashlight and running out of the woods. And then again, last night, I could have swore that I saw a person crouching near my neighbour's car just looking around. I thought that I was done researching because, well, like I said, I couldn't find anything about any animals that sounded like that. But now, I've begun researching any stories even similar to mine, hoping that I'm either not alone or, even better, someone has the answer to the strange occurrences. Because I would like to start sleeping at a more normal time again and not be worried about either a stalker or a poltergeist coming to get me in my sleep. The whole situation has just been really weird and strange, and I hope that it all ends soon. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.